Together with the Sinai Peninsula, Israel had also conquered the Gaza Strip. After the IDF occupied the Strip, Rehavia Vardi sent some of his men from Unit 504 to search for the Egyptian intelligence building in Gaza City, where Mustafa Hafez had been killed a few months before. In a cellar, they found a hidden treasure, one that the desperate, fleeing Egyptians had neglected to destroy. The intact card file of all the Palestinian terrorists that Hafez and his men had deployed against Israel in the 5 years preceding the Sinai campaign. It was as if the Egyptians had left a hit list. Vardi met with his chief of staff, Dayan, and asked for his permission to begin killing the Palestinians named on the card file. Dayan, in turn, received Ben-Gurion's approval. Vardi then ordered Natan Rotberg and his vat of explosives to go into overdrive. Rotberg's special formula was poured into wicker baskets, cigarette lighters, fruits, vegetables, even pieces of furniture. Unit 504's Arab agents concealed the bombs in appropriate places or passed them on as gifts to as many as 30 Palestinian fedayeen in Gaza. Between November 1957 and March 1958, Vardi's men worked through the file, eliminating men who terrorized Israelis for years. The targeted killing missions were largely a success, tactically speaking, but not necessarily strategically. All these eliminations were of very limited importance, Rotberg said, because others simply took their place. Very quickly, the secret conspiracy by Britain, France, and Israel turned into a resounding international diplomatic disaster. The United States had forced Israel to withdraw from Sinai and Gaza. France and Britain also caved in and finally lost control of the canal, and the leaders of both those superpowers were forced to resign. The Egyptian regime was now seen as having stood up to meddling. I'm going to start that whole shit again, because I suck at this. The Egyptian regime was now seen as having stood up to meddling Western colonialism, and having forced two great European powers and its sworn Jewish enemy to stand down. Nasser was cast as a hero and became, for all practical purposes, the leader of the Arab world. Nasser did, however, agree to allow Israeli ships to use the canal and to stop sponsoring fedayeen operations in Gaza. He grasped that the potential for a great military flare-up with Israel from these operations was greater than the advantages to be derived from them. Finally, in 1957, it seemed that the terror would stop streaming into Israel from across the border. The Sinai campaign made it clear that to the Arab states that destroying Israel would be very difficult, and it gave Israel 11 years of freedom from large-scale warfare, up until the Six-Day War of 1967. The IDF used this time to morph into a powerful, large, well-trained, technology-based military force, equipped with modern weapons and boasting an intelligence arm, Amman, with extensive capabilities. The years that followed were also good years for Mossad. Isser Harel had nurtured it from a fledgling, sometimes stumbling organization into an agency of close to 1,000 employees, renowned internationally for its toughness, tenacity, and enterprise. Israel had begun to emerge as an intelligence power in 1956 after Nikita Khrushchev gave a secret speech to the 20th Communist Party Congress in which he spoke frankly about the crimes committed by his predecessor, Joseph Stalin. Every spy outfit in the Western world was anxious to obtain the text to study it for clues of Khrushchev's mindset, but none of them could penetrate the Soviet uniform's iron veil of secrecy. It was Israeli intelligence that succeeded, and Isser Harel ordered that a copy of this speech be handed to the CIA. The agency's impressed and grateful dictator Allen Dulles passed it on to President Dwight Eisenhower, who then ordered that it be leaked to the New York Times. The publication stirred up a global storm and greatly embarrassed the Soviet Union. The secret alliance between American and Israeli intelligence was born, and on the American side, it was led by James Jesus Angleton, or maybe that's just called James Jesus Angleton, chief of the CIA's counterintelligence staff, a supporter of Israel, who, like Harel, saw a Soviet spy under every bed. Through this channel, the CIA would obtain a great deal of Middle East intelligence, a practice that continues to this day. Israel's Sinai campaign of 1956 through a political disaster further cemented the country's standing in intelligence operations. In the wake of that brief war, Harel began weaving a network of secret contacts within countries all over the Middle East, Asia, and Africa, including many that publicly sided with Arabs. This modus operandi was known in the Mossad as the Periphery Doctrine, and it called for the establishment of covert links with countries and organizations that lay just outside the ring of hostile Arab states surrounding Israel, or with minorities inside those states who were at conflict with Israel's adversaries. The outstanding achievement of the Mossad's periphery strategy was a tripartite. I've only seen that word one other time in a Protest the Hero album. Tripartite. The outstanding achievement of the Mossad's periphery strategy was a tripartite intelligence alliance, codenamed Trident, between Israel and the Shah's Iran and Turkey. The heads of the three countries' spy agencies would meet from time to time and exchange large amounts of intelligence material. The alliance also carried out joint operations against the Soviets and the Arabs. Ben-Gurion persuaded President Eisenhower that Trident was a top-class asset, and the CIA provided funds for its activities. The biggest coup for the Mossad, however, came in 1960, when Israeli operatives tracked Adolf Eichmann, one of the main architects and facilitators of Hitler's final solution, to Buenos Aires, where he had been living for 10 years under the name Ricardo Clement. A German Jewish prosecutor, Fritz Bauer, despaired of the chances of bringing Nazi war criminals to justice in Germany, so instead he leaked information that he had gathered about Eichmann to the Mossad. When a Mossad official came to see him, Bauer left him alone, with the classified documents lying on the desktop. The Israeli understood the hint and copied the relevant details. Ben-Gurion authorized Harel to go to Buenos Aires at the head of a large team. The premier was determined to settle accounts with Eichmann, who was given the code name Debuk, from the Hebrew word for an evil spirit that takes hold of a living person. But the aim of the operation was far greater than wreaking vengeance upon an individual, however egregious his transgressions may have been. Ben-Gurion ordered Harel and his team not to physically harm Eichmann, although killing him would have been the easiest option, but instead to kidnap him and bring him to face trial in Israel. The goal was to stir an internationally resonant awareness and an ineradicable memory of the Holocaust via exposure of the acts of one of its chief perpetrators. Dozens of Mossad operatives and collaborators took part in the operation, some of them carrying and switching passports of up to 5 nations. They spread out into a number of safe houses all over the Argentinian capital. On May 11th, the team positioned itself near the stop where the man known as Clement got off the bus every evening at 7:40 and walked a short distance to his home. On this evening, the bus came, but Eichmann did not appear. The team's orders were to wait until no longer than 8 p.m., and if he did not appear by then, to abort, so as not to arouse suspicion. At 8, they were preparing to pack it up, but Rafi Eaton, commander of the field, decided to wait a little longer. 5 minutes later, when Eaton was about to give up for the night, another bus stopped. Clement descended and began walking, one hand in his pocket. Zevi Malkin was the first to pounce. He feared that Clement suspected something that was about to draw. Zevi Malkin was the first to pounce. He feared that Clement suspected something and was about to draw a gun, so instead of grabbing him from behind and dragging him to the car, as he planned, he pushed him from behind into a ditch and jumped on top of him, with Eaton and another operative close behind. Clement yelled, but there was no one around to hear him. Within seconds, he was overpowered and tossed into the back seat of a car. Zevi Aharoni, a Mossad operative who was sitting there, told him in German that if he made a trouble, he would be shot on the spot. Eichen began looking for marks that would indicate beyond a doubt that he was indeed Eichmann. The scar under his arm, where the SS tattooed him, was easily located. The scar of an appendectomy that he had undergone, meticulously documented in his SS file, was more of a problem. Eaton had to open his belt and shove his hand under Clement's trousers, all while the car was roaring ahead and the passengers were being jolted from side to side. But he eventually found it and claimed, "Zehu, Zehu," Hebrew for "it's him, it's him." In the dark, Eaton and Malkin's eyes were shining. They shook hands and hummed a few bars of the partisan song, which had been written in honor of the Jews who had fought the Nazis in the forest, and ends in the line, "Our march beats out the message. We are here." Eichmann was sedated and smuggled into Israel in an El Al plane. His trial in Jerusalem attracted unprecedented attention internationally, and the procession of witnesses reminded the world of the atrocities of the Holocaust. Eichmann was sentenced to death and executed by hanging. His body read poorly by Tom. His body was cremated and his ashes scattered at sea. Meanwhile, the skimpy news release about Eichmann's discovery and abductions had given the Mossad the standing of a ruthless and capable espionage agency. By mid-1962, Harl was considered the strong man of the Israeli intelligence and defense establishments. Ben-Gurion had gotten everything he'd hoped for, but for all that glory, Harl's agency had completely missed a devastating threat developing right next door.